Well, it's great to be here with you all, and I'm going to share some stories about how Global Generation has worked with the power of community, and particularly with children and young people. So let me take you back. It was 2002, and I was involved in taking a group of young people to Wiltshire, to Pertwood Organic Farm. We were going on camp, and we arrived at night, and it was pitch black. And as we made our way down the path, I could feel this group of teenagers suddenly grow silent, because they were half terrified and half excited. Around us, we could hear all the sounds of the forest, and there was a pfft as an owl went upwards. And above us, the stars had just started to come out. Well, at the end of those 3 days, it seemed like the group of young people had bonded in a different way with each other, and they'd also bonded with the land. In a way, it was as if they had felt that a sense of community, and as the great ecologist Aldo Leopold would say, they felt that community was not just between different groups of people, but between all of us, and soils, waters, plants and animals. Well, when I went back to London, that experience, it left a mark on me, and over the coming months I pulled together a group of friends, and they started volunteering, and we formed what was to become Global Generation. And we had two key things in mind. We felt that this connection with the land was really important, but not just in the countryside, in the heart of the city. We wanted to bring that spirit that we'd experienced at Pertwood back to the middle of the city. And we also felt the other main thing was to support children and young people to do significant things in public places. Not just for them, but because, as we've just heard, of that their imaginations and creativity was really needed to create a different kind of future. Since then, we've done a lot of work with primary schools and secondary schools, but the backbone of our work has always been having a small group of teenagers who we call our generators to help us with this vision of creating a different kind of future. And the beginning of their experience is also we take them down to have this few days at Pertwood Farm. And I've got Vivian here today, and she's going to share something of her experience, but I'll just have to tell you, she kindly stepped in 2 hours ago because another young generator had tonsillitis. So over to Vivian.
So this is definitely higher than I expected, but so ever since I've joined Global Generation, I went to Pertwood Farm, and after I went, I felt this kind of strange emotion, as if this type of longing that I'd never felt before, because, you know, as someone who lives in London, we're always surrounded by all of these industrialised things full of cars and trucks and all of these things that we don't usually see in Pertwood, which is a campsite. So then I thought to myself, well, why do I miss Pertwood so much? And, well, I thought maybe it's because of the silent early morning walks we went on, because we would go on all these walks and we would take it as a chance to reflect on not only the outside world but also yourself. And I thought that was really crucial for us as teenagers and children to learn that it's important to reflect on ourselves once in a while. And then I thought, well, why else would I miss Pertwood? Well, it could also be because of the curiosity that we felt when we explored the birds' nests. Because, well, whether you're a politician, an artist, a writer, or an architect, it's always curiosity that drives us to do all of these amazing things. So then I thought to myself, well, that's another reason why I love Pertwood so much. But the last reason, which I thought was one of the most important, is togetherness. because when you're all surrounded by this fire and all of us have our faces illuminated by the flames, you don't feel so alone anymore. Because when you look up at the night sky and you see the stars all in the midnight blue sky just glistening slowly, and you think, I'm alone in this world, and sometimes I just don't feel together with other people. But then if you look forward and you see the fire in front of you, then maybe you start to feel this warmth which you've never felt before. So I thought that was really important to me, that even when you feel alone and you feel really cold and there's no one else there, you should always look for that fire that will always guide you through the night. So that was my experience of poethood, which taught me a lot of things, and I'm really grateful for it. And it's something that I'll always carry in my heart forever. Thank you.
So, as Vivian has so eloquently described, the work is very hands-on and very practical, but it's also quite reflective. It's an inner and an outer and a collective process, which we sometimes refer to as I, we, and the planet. So back to this business of doing significant things in the middle of London. Our first project we had an opportunity to work on with a group of teenagers was to transform the top of an office building in King's Cross into a biodiverse living roof. And this was an opportunity for the teenagers and their families to enter a previously inaccessible, seemingly out of bounds building. And it was an opportunity for the teenagers to teach the office workers about seasonality and how the soil works. And it was great. But then that summer, there was a terrible drought. And our living roof, well, it died. So we desperately started thinking of how we could bring water to the roof. Rainwater harvesting, greater green water, recycling, to the point that some months later we ended up with so much water we weren't sure what to do with it. So actually in that building we were able to get half the toilets in the building flushed with the grey water recycling. And then we also began growing food, which was another opportunity to bring different people together through harvesting and cooking together. And very soon we were developing other food growing projects on top of other office buildings. And then at that time I met Roger Madeline, who, as you've heard, was heading up the King's Cross development. And I managed to persuade him that we could have a garden and what was basically then a construction site in a series of 8 skips. And that became the Skip Garden. And back then, in 2009, it was pretty much just us and the construction workers, and then we would bring children in to work on the garden. And they would work together, and we would ask them, what does this represent? And they had a sense that they were hands-on, involved in creating the future. And then by degrees, we involved the new business occupants who were moving in and the residents who lived in the area. So the Skip Garden became very much a place for not just growing carrots and cabbages, but it was really a place for growing community, but between diverse and different people. And as it evolved, many of the ideas that we took forward were ideas from young people. So we now have a cafe. In fact, people even get married there. And that was all an idea that came from one of the teenagers who worked with us. Because of the experience of the Skip Garden, Roger invited me to come down to have a look at Canada Water and see if perhaps we could be involved in helping children and young people in the co-creation of pockets of gardens within the public places. Well, I have to admit I was quite tentative at first because I don't live in the area and I know what it can feel like. I live near King's Cross, so I know what it can feel like when people parachute into an area with lots of bright ideas of what should be done. And the first period was really a period of meeting people and listening and learning. And then actually people were incredibly welcoming, and it seemed right to make a start. But where to begin? So I was shown around with some colleagues the what was the former Daily Mail print works. And I can remember being taken in through the awesome kind of huge press halls. And I was really impressed and excited, but then I couldn't really imagine them for intimate groups of children telling stories. And then we went through these darkened kind of corridors down into a disused tool store with a metal shutter. And our guide, a guy called Chris, he suddenly said, "Wow, what do you think? Could this be a community space?" And my heart sank. But luckily I was with one of my colleagues, Sue, who's an artist and a maker. And she perked up and she said, "Oh, I think we could do something with this." And so we did. And a few weeks later we were receiving a load of newspaper reels, disused print reels with the cardboard core on the inside and quite a lot of paper left on the outside, because this was to be the paper garden in honour of the history of the building. And we would involve children and young people in making paper stools and paper tables, even a paper woven paper yurt. And within a month, children were making their way through the security gates, and I would take them on a tour through the building, and they would go into the huge press halls, and like me, they went down the darkened corridors. And I always liked taking them into what I consider to be the bowels of the building. This is the ink room. And it was pretty obvious to them that it was a place for machines, a place that had not at that time had either nature or children in mind. And in the half dark, I would say to them, "Well, you guys have got a job to do. You've got a job for bringing your imaginations and bringing the creativity of nature into the print works, and in time out into the wider community as the public spaces are developed." So the first months, it was about this time of year, no, it was February, March, I think, but it was freezing and cold. So we worked away behind the metal shutter, and we longed to get outside. And we're an environmental education organisation, so to get our hands in the soil. And I wasn't quite sure how that would happen, but I finally managed to persuade Simon and Simeon, who currently run the print works, to give us a little slip of land at the edge of the car park, and there was a disused smoking shelter. And that became our very small first garden, and the smoking shelter became a polytunnel for growing plants. And children came in and worked there, and by degrees they worked their magic, because I arrived at work one day and found some big black metal shipping containers marking out a fairly chunky part of the car park, and this was to be our new garden, something I hadn't requested, but it came our way. And it had a sense of it being a kind of secret garden. And we worked with children and young people there, but we also worked with older members of the community from nearby organisation Time and Talents. And some of them had lived in the area even when they were children, and they told us stories about how they had collected blackberries and raspberries from where the print works now stand. So in honour of their stories, we started making jam together with them and the children, and then we planted a corner of our garden with all the kinds of jams and berries that you need to make good jam. So next we had the jam, but we needed more. We needed bread, we needed pizzas. So I put in a request for permission to have a wood-burning oven. And the response came back a few days later. It was a fairly definite no. Well, this time it was a group of refugees from the Bosco Centre who changed hearts and minds. And the first time they came to work with us, we created an open fire and they cooked stick bread over the open fire. And somehow this process unlocked their stories of their grandparents and of the places that they came. And I remember one young man telling me that it had taken him 8 months to come to London because he'd walked all the way from Afghanistan. You could say that we often live in a very short time frame. Perhaps we live thinking about 30 years or the lives of our children. Early peoples, they had a much longer sense of time. For them, there was a sense that the earth and even the stars themselves were their ancestors, and there was this sense of being responsible for 7 generations ahead. So sometimes in Global Generations projects, we whilst doing something practical, we open up a big context that I like to call the long time. So if we're working with wood, we might introduce reflective ways and scientific ways of thinking about the evolution of forests on the earth and the life of a tree. And sometimes we do this through different creative practices, and one of them is free-fall writing. And Andres is going to share some of what he wrote about being a tree.
So basically, free-fall writing is when you just write without thinking about anything like grammar, punctuation or spelling. You just write whatever comes into your head, starting with the starting sentence, and just write it down on paper. So here is what I wrote about being an oak tree. For hundreds of years I have endured and seen many, many things. What I have seen goes far beyond your imagination, centuries passing like days. But my strong trunk and flexible branches remain life-giving, giving a home to many and oxygen to more. For hundreds of insects thrive under my thick bark, and foxes house under my gnarled, beautiful roots. I sense every movement, every touch, and feel the world in constant motion. I'm the host, I'm the home. I'm the shelter and I'm the strong. I'm connected and I'm life-giving. Do you still want to cut me down?
In King's Cross, in the Skip Garden, we have a community kiln. It's a collaboration with the ceramics department of Central St Martin's University. And sometimes when we are making things to go in the kiln, we work with clay, and that is brought to us by the construction teams, or some of the clay has been. They've brought us London clay from King's Cross. And working with clay has been an invitation to consider the evolution of the earth and the fact that the crust of the earth, as cosmologist Brian Swim would say, is the storybook of life's great adventures. So you could say, as unknown as the future is, and perhaps the future has always been unknown and uncertain, that all of us are living in an epic story, a 13.7 billion year story. And it's a story that has been brought about through overcoming challenge, through creativity, but most of all through the incredible power of community.